They said the Wallaces were not born like other families. They were carved out of the dark places in the mountains, shaped by hunger, silence, and the kind of secrets that rot in the blood. If you listen to the older folks, they'll tell you. There are hollows in Appalachia where no man dares walk after sundown, and in those hollows, once upon a time, the Wallaces waited. The story begins not with a feast, not with fire, but with a birth. A child born into a cabin where the windows were nailed shut, where the air was heavy with the musk of unwashed bodies and the copper temps of blood. No laughter greeted the infant, only whispers, only the sound of a mother who was also a cousin, a father who was also an uncle. In the Wallace line, family ties were not woven, they were knotted, twisted back upon themselves until they strangled. The mountains were their prison, and yet their kingdom. The Wallaces lived far beyond the church bells and the roads where wagons rolled. Their world was a thicket of tangled roots and cold stone streams, a place where the sun seemed hesitant to shine. When food was scarce, and food was always scarce, the Wallaces turned inward, not only upon themselves for comfort, but, it is whispered, for sustenance. Flesh was flesh, whether it crawled on 4 legs or walked on 2. Imagine the scene inside. Their one-room cabin, a fire smoldering low, casting orange light on cracked beams. The air thick with smoke, with the stench of rancid fat. In the shadows, gaunt figures crouched around a blackened pot. Something boiled slowly, bones rising to the surface, hollow eyes reflecting the fire's glow. No prayers were spoken over meals in that cabin, only silence and the occasional scrape of teeth against bone. Children raised in such silence never knew shame, for shame was a word from another world. They learned instead the rules of survival. Do not leave the ridge at night. Do not speak to outsiders. Do not waste meat, whatever its source. And above all, keep the family together, no matter the cost. Blood was not just thicker than water, it was the only thing that mattered. Townsfolk in the valleys below told stories in half-whispers of hunters who never returned from the upper hollows, of bones scattered in the underbrush, gnawed clean like the remains of deer, of voices echoing in the woods long after midnight. Shrill laughter that seemed to belong neither to man nor woman, but to something caught between. Children were warned, don't wander past the creek, or the Wallaces will get you. But this was no fairy tale. The Wallaces were flesh and blood, as real as the dirt beneath the trees. And their story, one of hunger, one of fear, one of generations, trapped in a cycle too grotesque to break, would stain the mountains forever. They were not the only family in Appalachia to marry kin, nor the only to know hunger, but they were the most feared. Because unlike the others, the Wallaces did not merely survive, they hunted, and when the town began to realize this truth, it was already too late. For once you smell the smoke from their fire, once you see the gleam of eyes from the tree line, you will not escape the Wallace Hollow alive. The years slipped by, but the Wallaces remained frozen in their hollow, untouched by time, untouched by mercy. To the outside world, decades brought roads, factories, the hum of progress, but to the Wallaces, the cabin stayed the same. One room, one fire, one secret. Their children grew, only to bear more children, faces blurred together, sunken eyes, slack jaws, twisted spines. It was as though the blood itself had grown weary, circling too long in the same family veins. And yet, they endured. Hunger, after all, is the most patient teacher. The Wallaces learned to live not just from the earth, but from the shadows it concealed. Rabbits, squirrels, the occasional wild dog all found their way into the pot. But when the winters grew long, when snow blanketed the ridge, and the streams froze solid, other meat was taken. Hunters from town began to vanish, first one, then another. At first, it was easy to blame wolves or the cold, but wolves leave tracks, and the cold leaves bodies. These men left nothing behind but whispers, and always. The last place they were seen was the ridge that led toward the Wallace Hollow. Some swore they saw them figures moving at dusk, gaunt and crooked, their pale skin glowing in the half-light like the bark of dead birch trees. Others claimed to hear laughter on the wind, laughter that curdled the blood because it sounded like children's voices, though no child could laugh that way. Inside the hollow, nights were long and filled with the music of hunger. The fire crackled, bones cracked, teeth gnawed in the silence. Some said the Wallaces had forgotten the difference between animal and man. Others said they had never known the difference in the first place. By then, the town had stopped pretending. The preacher, with his trembling hands and white-knuckled grip on the Bible, warned his flock, "Do not wander past the ridge. Do not answer voices in the trees. Do not follow the smell of meat when the night is dark." But warnings have a way of fading, and temptation has a way of calling. Hunters went for deer, trappers went for pelts, lovers went to the woods for solitude. Some returned, many did not dot, and the silence of the hollow grew louder. But perhaps the most terrifying truth was not in the whispers of missing men, not in the blackened pots or the scattered bones. It was in the eyes of the children born in that cabin. They did not weep when meat was laid before them. They did not flinch at the sight of blood. They smiled, lips red, faces glowing in the firelight, for to them, this was not horror. This was home. And so, the legend spread. From ridge to ridge, from valley to valley, the name Wallace became a curse. A word spoken only when the fire was strong and the doors were bolted. For it was said that even if you never set foot in their hollow, the Wallaces might come down the mountain. And when they did, no prayer would save you, for hunger was in their marrow. And hunger, unlike fear, does not fade. By the time the 20th century pressed its boots onto Appalachia, the Wallaces had already become less a family and more a warning carved into the land itself. Parents hissed their name to children who dared sneak out after dusk. Hunters muttered it under their breath as they loaded rifles before entering the forest. And yet, for every whisper, the hollow stood untouched, because fear is its own kind of fence. But fear is never perfect. One bitter autumn, when the leaves bled red across the mountains, 3 young men from the nearest town marched up the ridge with shotguns slung across their shoulders. They called it a hunt, though everyone knew it was a test of courage. They laughed loudly, perhaps to scare away the thing that lingered in their own thoughts. They were determined to see if the legends were true. The sun died behind the trees, and the forest folded into silence. By morning, 2 of the men were found recognizable, torn and scattered among the roots. The third was never found at all. The only sign of him was a trail of footprints that seemed to vanish at the edge of the Wallace Hollow, as though the ground itself had swallowed him whole. From that day, the town could no longer ignore what festered in the mountains. A small band of men gathered, torches and axes in hand. Some went out of duty, others out of vengeance. The preacher came too, clutching his Bible as if words alone could turn back what had been birthed in the hollow. Together, they climbed the ridge, guided by smoke that slithered from a chimney where no man dared live. What they found was a place outside the laws of God or man. The cabin stank of rot and marrow, pots still boiled on the hearth, filled with a stew, too thick to name, bones some animal, some not lay stacked in corners, stripped bare and gleaming white in the firelight. And in the shadows of that single room stood the Wallaces themselves, gaunt, pale, their bodies bent like broken branches, their eyes burning, with something more primal than hatred, something older than language. The men from town spoke no words. Fire spoke for them. Flames swallowed the cabin, timbers snapping like bones, smoke clawing into the sky. Screams echoed through the forest, high and thin, neither fully human nor beast. Some claimed to see shapes bursting from the fire, fleeing into the night. Others said the fire consumed them all. No one could agree, and perhaps that was the most terrifying part. For weeks after, the woods smelled of ash and something far worse. Hunters swore they heard footsteps behind them, soft and dragging. Children whispered of pale faces at their windows. And though the cabin was gone, the legend was not. To this day, the ridge where the Wallaces lived is avoided. Trees grow strange there, twisted as though the earth itself recoils. Animals shy from the soil, and travelers who wander too close often speak of feeling watched, followed, marked. Whether the Wallaces truly died in that fire, or whether their blood still festers in hidden corners of Appalachia, no one can say. But every hunter who vanishes, every camper who does not return, every scream carried on the night wind is laid at their feet. And so the Wallace name lingers, half legend, half warning, fully terror. And in Appalachia, it is said still hunger never dies. That closes the Wallace story across 3 chapters. The Wallace cabin may be gone, but its shadows are not. The hollow where they lived still carries whispers. Some say you can hear them at night. The echoes of screams swallowed by the trees. Their story is not just about hunger. It is about what isolation, secrecy, and silence can breed when left to fester. And though the flames erased the cabin, the legend endures, lurking in the ridges of Appalachia, waiting to be told again. If this tale has unsettled you, remember there are more stories buried in these mountains, more names erased from history, more horrors that never made it to the daylight. Subscribe, share, and stay with us as we walk deeper into the darkness. Because some legends do not die, they wait, patient and hungry, for someone willing to listen.